Hi, this is Editor's Take. I'm Sakshi Batra, and with me is Gaurav Chaudhary, is the Deputy Executive Editor of Money Control, and we are going to be talking about the big expectations from the Union Budget, which is going to be presented by Nirmala Sitharaman on Friday. Thanks a lot, Gaurav, for joining in. Well, this time around in February, the interim budget was also much bigger than anybody's expectations. Can we expect even more from the upcoming Union Budget?
I think so. We can, because there's a lot of expectation riding on it, and the conditions under which this budget is being presented compared to, say, the interim budget or the budget for 18-19 are very different.
Okay.
We're in the middle of a slowdown, and the government is still basking in the glory of a landslide election victory. There are a lot of election promises, that there are expectations about a lot of election promises, and there is a certain pace that the government has set right after assuming office, including one of the first decisions that we saw that the cabinet took after assuming office was to universalize PM Kisan, under which rupees 6,000 are paid directly to the farmers, in various installments, and this was earlier restricted to only those farmers with 2 hectares of land. Now it is being universalized or expanded to include all farmers, including landless farmers and rich farmers who also own more than 2 hectares of land. That's going to cost the government an additional about 16,000 crore rupees, which that has to be factored in the budget. But more than that, there's a lot of interest riding on what the government is going to do for turning around the broader economy.
Yeah.
And that can only come if there is if there is some kind of a trigger to boost consumption spending and trigger a cycle of investment and hiring. That will come only if households are encouraged to spend, and they can only spend when there is more money in their hands. So I expect some kind of tax breaks to come in for the middle class, especially the salaried class, and don't be surprised if there's a change in the exemption limit from 2.5 lakh rupees now to, say, about 3 lakh or upwards. And likewise for Section 60C, limits might be raised from 150,000 currently, and also tax deductions on interest on housing loans, etc.
Sure.
The government will have to turn around consumption spending if the economy has to turn around. But the big focus of the budget clearly is going to be on farmers, on welfare policies, and also, as the Prime Minister has already demonstrated, that his government's second term will clearly have a very large, ambitious project of getting piped water to every household by 2024. That's going to get a big focus in this budget.
Absolutely. So you did point out that we are amid an economic slowdown, and that clearly has to be arrested, and the government and the budget could be looking at taking some policy measures which could arrest that. Apart from this, which are the other big challenges facing the government right now, and which should be on the top priority?
Clearly, farm distress is one,
and
as we have seen, monsoon has been delayed and is deficient, although it might gather pace and cover the rest of the country. So that is something that the government will have to keep a close eye on. But solving agrarian distress requires a structural approach. It has to come out with policy mediation that essentially shifts the terms of trade in favor of agriculture. Right now, what is happening? Food prices are falling, so that means farmers' income is falling, but non-food inflation is rising. So what does it mean? It means that farmers are paying more for goods that they're buying rather than for goods that they're selling. So the terms of trade has moved completely against farmers. That has to be changed, and that can only change if we can get the farmers closer to the markets. That is, the farmers get more price for the produce that they're selling than what they're getting now. And if the wholesale price or the farm gate price is closer to the retail price of households, the better it gets for farmers. So I expect a lot of intervention through big data analytics, artificial intelligence, and blockchain kind of technology that the finance minister is likely to announce in this budget. The BJP, in its run-up to the elections, in its election manifesto, has promised to bring about policies to enable investment worth 25 lakh crore over a 5-year period, both involving the government and the private sector. So those policies clearly are going to be probably specified in this budget, because this is something that the government is clearly aware of. More than anything, it's also a very strong political constituency.
Right.
And we have seen, a widespread farm protest across the country, and many states have responded by giving debt write-offs and loan waivers, etc. So the government is aware of it. It wants to solve the agrarian distress through a conclusive approach. Expect a lot of structural changes to come about. But another thing that the government is going to clearly focus on is on creation of jobs.
Yes.
Employment creation remains a challenge for India, not because there are not enough investment taking or jobs not being created, because we are at a particular end of the particular stage of the technology cycle, and creating jobs and for people who have the right degree of skills to get those jobs,
Right.
it'll remain a challenge. So if you go by what the BJP said in its manifesto, they're going to identify 22 champion sectors which they believe have the highest hiring potential. So those sectors probably is going to get some focus in the budget.
Absolutely, but we also have to recognize that government's fiscal position is quite strained at the moment.
Yes.
We did see that a slightly overshot fiscal deficit even in the February interim budget as well. So 3.4%, do you think it is likely to overshoot it this time around as well? How much room do we have, and will it be a big concern if we don't meet this target?
So this 3.4% was set in February. That was a time when the government came out with revised estimates of direct tax and indirect tax collections. And this budget will be presented in July. So the tax estimates for last year is behind the government now, and they have a fair idea of where the tax collections for last year stand. The actual tax collections for last year, 18-19, was actually lower than the revised estimates that it was presented in February.
Yeah.
So I would even if the government does not overshoot expenditure, the revenue position is, if the government were to meet its interim budget estimates for 19-20, then the tax revenues have to grow significantly.
Right.
Say, for instance, in the case of indirect tax collection, it has to grow up by up to 23% to meet the indirect tax estimates set out in the interim budget. So I expect downward revision in the tax estimates, tax collection estimates. But having said that, government has already made an announcement of universalization of PM Kisan. So that's about 15 to 17,000 crore extra expenditure, which in the interim budget was set at 75,000 crore. Now an additional expenditure has to be factored in. Likewise, there are some other welfare measures that the government might announce, and add to that the shortfall in tax revenue of last year and a slower growth, which the government will probably factor in based on last year's estimates, could force the fiscal deficit to widen, and government could be forced to ease it from 3.4% set in interim budget to be, and there are reports it could go up to 3.6%. That means the government will have to end up borrowing about 42,000 crore more rupees, which the bond market and the equity markets and the rupee market will not like at all.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Gaurav, for sharing with us all those insights and expectations from the big union budget. All eyes are on Friday, 48 hours from now, when Nirmala Sitharaman will rise to present the union budget and all the big expectations from her maiden budget speech as well. And will that be able to address all the challenges that are being faced by the country and the government right now? Will it provide certain confidence in the revival of the economy and also spur growth? For all that, we'll have to just wait and watch out for that. Till that time, thanks a lot for joining us in this edition of Editor's Take, and do stay logged on to moneycontrol.com for more news and updates. Thanks for watching.